So in looking over Book 1, trying to get a handle on what's going on in Book 1, I suggest that there is, besides Socrates, the major character to pay attention to is this character, Thrasymachus. Now, there's some important things that are said in the beginning of the dialogue with the character Polemarchus. He makes certain claims about justice, about what justice is, that Socrates asks some questions about. And it's during this discussion with Polemarchus that one imagines that Thrasymachus, the other character, and you have to imagine a group of men in the house of Polemarchus, the seashore house basically, the Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, which is where they are, that Polemarchus and Socrates say some things about justice which really anger Thrasymachus, and that's why Thrasymachus jumps in. I guess that is around page 12 or 13, around 336, 337 in your margin numbers. And what seems to really vex Thrasymachus is the conclusion that Socrates brings Polemarchus to in the previous discussion, that the just man harms no one. Now, Polemarchus has said some pretty interesting things about justice. For instance, that what is justice? Justice is giving to each what is owed them. And Socrates draws that out a little bit, and it's not a bad definition, I think. But what he gets Polemarchus to admit is what he really means by that is that to give each what is owed to them means to help your friends because you owe help and benefit to your friends, and to harm your enemies because that's what they deserve, that's what they're owed. So that notion that the just man helps his friends and harms his enemies is kind of a very important attitude, and on the part of Socrates' contemporaries, I would say it's a very Athenian attitude, competitive, democratic society of Athens, highly politicized. And the way that one proves oneself is by helping friends and hurting enemies, an old attitude. But what Socrates gets Polemarchus to admit is that, while the first half of that definition is fine, that the just person, just man, in the way they're talking about it, helps his friends, that there's a problem with the second part, that he harms his enemies. And what he gets Polemarchus to admit is that justice is a good thing. But when you harm someone, you make them worse. You'll see this argument. It's not a very difficult argument. It's there. If you harm someone, you make them worse. Then you make them less virtuous and therefore less just. So that it doesn't make any sense for a just person using justice, employing justice, to harm someone, because by harming them, you make them worse, less virtuous, less just. So how could a work of justice make someone less just? So what he gets Polemarchus to admit is that doesn't make any sense, and that therefore the just man harms no one, just helps. Now, Thrasymachus can't stand this, obviously. If you look at the way that he breaks in, he's very angry. It's almost as if he thinks that Polemarchus and Socrates are speaking like children, like naive children. And he has a very different idea of what justice is. He has this very mysterious or compelling yet mysterious statement that justice is simply the advantage of the strong. And as we see him explain that, he has a very cynical view that basically justice is whatever those in power say it is. They get to make up the rules, the laws. They call them justice, or they call these laws they make just. And invariably, these laws benefit themselves, the ones who make them, the strong. So in that way, justice is just the advantage, the interest of the strong. And no doubt Socrates has big problems with that, and we'll, in the study questions, etc., we'll look at why he thinks that's wrong. But as we see, when Thrasymachus speaks again, it's there that we really get a better hold on what the dialogue is actually about, and that is that although he says at first that justice is the advantage of the stronger, he seems to be interested in another related thesis, and that has to do with how we live. Socrates really sums up what's at issue here on page 32. This is margin number 352d. Socrates says to him, 352d5, after all, the argument concerns no ordinary topic, but the way we ought to live. Well, how so? Thrasymachus has not only said that justice is simply the advantage of the stronger, he said something about how we should live, and what he said is basically that justice, if one chooses it, is the wrong way to go. This is the speech that he gives on page 21, around 343b, about shepherds and cowherds, and that continues to another page into 22. And what he basically says is that if you choose justice, if you choose to live a just way of life, to refrain from lying, to refrain from stealing, to refrain from simply living your life selfishly and for yourself, that is, if you choose to have scruples, to be just, to hold yourself to a certain ethical standard and refrain from doing certain things that may benefit you, but because they're wrong, you don't do them. If you do that, you're stupid. You're sandbagging yourself. And the truth is that in life, in real life, he seems to be saying, the unjust person always gets more than the just person. The unjust person prospers, and the unjust person tends to suffer. When it comes to things like paying taxes, doing business, and in all walks of life, that being just is hampering yourself, being naive and foolish, whereas the unjust seem to really have it figured out, implying that the best way of life, the happiest life, the most fulfilled life, is the life of injustice, and that if one is interested in being happy and fulfilled and living a successful life, that it's injustice that we should choose. Now,